morning fog clung to the hills like a secret, waiting to be uncovered. In the distance, the outline of a modest village began to emerge from the mist, its stone cottages nestled among the trees. A lone rider, cloaked in a dark, weathered coat, moved slowly through the quiet streets. His boots tapped lightly against the cobblestones, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. His eyes, sharp and vigilant, scanned the surroundings as though expecting something unseen. Behind him, the massive oak trees whispered in the wind, their branches twisting and creaking with every gust. The rider's face, hidden beneath the hood, revealed only a hint of the storm that brewed within. This was not just a village. It was a place where forgotten truths lingered, waiting to be discovered. The rider's gaze hardened as he neared the heart of the village. The quietness of the place felt unnatural, as if the very air held its breath. He could hear the distant murmurs of voices, but they were muffled, as though coming from behind closed doors. The buildings, though quaint, seemed to conceal more than they revealed. There were no children playing in the streets, no merchants peddling their wares. It was as if the village had fallen asleep, and yet something stirred beneath the surface. His heart quickened with the realization that this place was not what it seemed. There was a story here, buried deep within the soil of this quiet town, waiting for someone brave enough to unearth it. As the rider continued down the main road, a soft whisper caught his ear. At first it seemed like the wind, but the words were clear, though faint. "Come closer." The voice seemed to beckon him, distant, yet personal. His heart raced, but his resolve remained unshaken. He was no stranger to the unsettling. His journey had taught him that fear was often just another name for caution. The voice repeated itself, this time louder, as if urging him forward. The rider gripped his reins tighter, urging the horse to move faster. He was drawn to the source of the voice, as if something deep inside knew that the truth lay just beyond the next corner. Turning the corner, the rider found himself in a small square, a place where several paths converged. At its center stood an old well, its stone sides cracked and weathered by time. The whisper had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. The rider dismounted, his boots hitting the ground softly as he stepped closer to the well. He felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as though the well held more than just water, it held answers. His fingers brushed against the cold stone, and for a brief moment, the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. It was a fleeting sensation, but one that told him this was the place. The journey had led him here, and now the story would begin to unfold. The moment his hand made contact with the well, the air shifted. The whisper returned, this time louder, more urgent. "It is time." The rider felt a coldness spread through his fingertips as if something ancient was stirring beneath the earth. He recoiled, but the voice, no longer a whisper, echoed in his mind. "The truth is buried here." The ground shook again, more violently this time, and the rider's heart raced. He knew then that whatever secrets the village held, they were about to be uncovered. His journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The air was thick with tension as the rider's hand recoiled from the well. The voice that had once been a whisper was now a loud and clear command in his mind, urging him to act. Despite the tremor beneath his feet, he remained still for a moment, gathering his thoughts. The surrounding village seemed unchanged, yet he felt the weight of something ancient pressing down on him. The mist had cleared slightly, revealing the surrounding area in a new light. The silence was deafening, as though the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. The rider's instinct screamed that this was no coincidence. The well had been waiting for him, and whatever secrets it held, he was meant to uncover them. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. This journey was only beginning, and he would follow it wherever it led. With a deep breath, the rider finally stepped back from the well, his mind racing. A loud creaking sound broke the silence, and before he could react, the stone covering the well shifted. Slowly, the cover began to rise, revealing a dark, endless abyss. The whispering voice returned, louder than before, echoing through his mind. "Come closer, the truth awaits." The rider hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, his boots echoing in the empty square. He looked down into the darkness, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the unknown. As he peered deeper into the well, he noticed something faintly glowing in the depths. The glow flickered like a distant flame, drawing his gaze further into the abyss. His heart pounded as he reached out with one hand, unable to resist the beckoning call of whatever lay below. Without warning, the ground trembled again, stronger this time. The rider's feet shifted as the vibrations passed through him, the sensation like a pulse from deep within the earth. The glow from the well grew brighter, and the rider felt an overwhelming urge to descend. His breath quickened, and his thoughts raced, but he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited him below held the key to understanding everything. As if in answer to his thoughts, the ground shook one more time, and a low rumbling sound echoed from the depths of the well. The sound was unnerving, ancient, as if something long dormant was awakening. The rider swallowed hard, his mind set. There was no turning back now. He couldn't ignore the call of the unknown any longer. The rider carefully descended the worn stone steps that led into the depths of the well, his movements cautious yet purposeful. The air grew colder as he moved deeper, the glow growing stronger and illuminating the narrow passageway. The stones beneath his feet were slick with moisture, but he pressed on. The darkness enveloped him, but the eerie light from below continued to guide his way. Every step felt like it brought him closer to something powerful and old. The sound of his boots against the stone echoed in the stillness, the only sound in the suffocating quiet. His mind raced with questions, but no answers came. Only the glowing light grew brighter, drawing him down into the darkness, until the top of the well was a distant memory, far above. After what felt like an eternity, the rider's foot hit solid ground. He looked around, the soft glow now surrounding him completely. He was in a chamber of sorts, its walls lined with strange markings and symbols, ancient and worn. The air was thick with the scent of earth and old stone. The glow came from a pedestal at the center of the room, upon which lay a small, intricately carved box. The rider approached it cautiously, every instinct telling him that what lay inside was important. The whispers grew louder in his mind, urging him to open it. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out, brushing the surface of the box. It was cold to the touch, and as his fingers brushed the carvings, a jolt of energy shot through him. The box was alive with power, and he knew that whatever it contained would change everything. The moment the rider touched the box, a surge of energy coursed through his fingers, causing his entire body to freeze. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, their meanings now more apparent, ancient runes etched into the stone like forgotten memories. The air around him thickened, crackling with power. He staggered back, heart racing, unsure of what was happening. But before he could process, the box lid creaked open, revealing a soft, pulsing light within. The whispers that had haunted him earlier now morphed into distinct voices, speaking in unison, urging him to take the next step. As if compelled by forces beyond his control, the rider's hand reached inside the box. The air around him shimmered as he touched something cold and smooth, an object unlike anything he had ever seen before. It felt ancient, alive with energy. As his fingers brushed the object within the box, the pulsing light grew brighter, blinding him for a moment. A shock of energy surged through his arm and he cried out, though no sound escaped his lips. The light swirled around him, enveloping him in a warm, comforting embrace before suddenly pulling away. The box snapped shut, its glow fading into the stone walls. The room was silent again, but the air felt different, charged, as though the world itself had shifted. The rider stood still for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. The object was gone, but he could still feel its presence inside him. It was as if the power it contained had become a part of him. He looked around, the ancient symbols on the walls now seeming to whisper their own language, one he could almost understand. The journey had changed him. There was no turning back now. The ground beneath the rider shifted again, more violently this time. The walls seemed to crack as if they were alive, responding to the force that had just been unleashed. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the rider stumbled, his hands pressed against the stone for balance. He looked around frantically, unsure of what was happening. The glow from the box had vanished, but the energy it had left behind was palpable. It pulsed in the air, vibrating through his very bones. The whispering voices returned, louder this time, filling his mind with fragmented thoughts. "It has begun," they murmured. "The awakening is near." Panic began to rise within the rider's chest. He realized with growing dread that his actions had triggered something much bigger than himself. The journey he had started was no longer just about him. It was about something ancient and dangerous, something he couldn't control. The tremors continued to shake the chamber, but the rider's fear was overtaken by a sense of urgency. He had no choice but to move forward, to find answers. With shaking hands he reached for the stone door at the far end of the room, its surface cold and smooth. The door creaked open with a low groan, revealing a passageway that led even deeper into the earth. A new light, far stronger than before, illuminated the passage. It beckoned him forward. He stepped into the dark hallway, every instinct telling him that he was nearing something vital. The air was thick with mystery, each step heavier than the last. As he walked, the whispers became clearer, forming words in his mind. "The key lies ahead," they said, their voices now filled with urgency. There was no going back now. He was being pulled into the heart of whatever secret this village held. The passage seemed endless, but eventually the rider emerged into a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with intricate carvings and strange symbols. The air was thick with a heavy, palpable energy, and the room was illuminated by a single glowing crystal at its center. The crystal pulsed with the same eerie light that had filled the box, its glow casting strange shadows on the walls. As the rider approached, the ground trembled once again, and a low, guttural voice rumbled from the depths of the chamber. "You have come," it said, its voice both ancient and powerful. "The awakening is near." The rider knelt before the crystal, the energy within it resonating with his own. The whispers grew louder, almost overwhelming. It was as if the crystal was calling to him, urging him to take the final step. He knew then that the answers he sought were within his grasp, but at what cost? The crystal's light pulsed like a heartbeat, filling the cavernous room with its eerie glow. The voice that had spoken earlier echoed once more, this time closer, as if it surrounded the rider. "The time has come. You have awakened the ancient force," the voice rumbled, its tone both ominous and all-knowing. The rider felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, the weight of the voice pressing into his chest. He stood still, his breath shallow, unsure of what to do next. The glowing crystal in front of him thrummed with power, and he could feel the energy seeping into his very bones, connecting him to something far older than he could comprehend. The whispers in his mind became louder, speaking words that were no longer fragments but full sentences, urging him to embrace the unknown. But the rider hesitated. Could he truly handle what was about to unfold? The air in the chamber grew colder, the power of the crystal now a palpable force in the room. The whispers in the rider's mind turned into voices, many of them speaking in unison, their words garbled yet urgent. "Embrace your destiny," they chanted. The rider's mind swirled with confusion as he stepped closer to the crystal, compelled by a force he couldn't understand. He felt as if his very soul was being pulled toward it, drawn into the heart of something he couldn't escape. The crystal's pulse grew faster as if it were alive. It was as though it was feeding on the rider's hesitation, waiting for him to make a choice. The ground beneath him trembled again, and the rider felt the pressure build within his chest. The voice returned, now clearer than ever. "The key to your past lies within. Only by unlocking it will you understand." Unable to resist the pull any longer, the rider raised his hand toward the crystal. As his fingers brushed against its smooth surface, a jolt of energy shot through him, searing through his chest like fire. His vision blurred, and for a moment, everything around him disappeared. He was plunged into darkness, his body weightless, as if floating through an endless void. Then, the images came, flashes of memories that weren't his own. Faces he'd never seen, places he'd never visited, and events he could not place. They all rushed at him, overwhelming him. The rider's heart raced as the images sped by faster, until one particular vision stood still, frozen in time. A figure, cloaked in shadow, standing before a towering altar. The figure's eyes glowed with the same light that emanated from the crystal. "You are the one," the voice whispered. "The chosen one." The rider gasped, pulling his hand back from the crystal. The void faded, and he found himself standing once again in the chamber. But everything had changed. The crystal's glow had intensified, and the air felt charged with a new power. The whispers in his mind had turned into a singular voice, stronger and more commanding. "The truth has been revealed," it said. "Now you must face what comes next." The rider's legs felt weak, but his resolve had never been stronger. He had seen the figure in the vision, the one who had claimed to be the chosen one. And now, the rider understood. He wasn't just a traveler. He was part of a much larger story, a story that would affect the fate of this world. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily on his shoulders, but he knew he had no choice but to continue. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: his journey had only just begun. The air in the chamber shifted once more, becoming still and silent. The crystal's glow began to fade, and the vibrations that had filled the room slowly ceased. The rider exhaled slowly, trying to steady his breath. The overwhelming sense of power that had flooded the chamber began to subside, replaced by a quiet, almost haunting calm. But it wasn't over. He could feel it, the pull to move forward, to continue the journey. He had been chosen for something greater, but the cost was unknown. And as much as he wished for answers, he knew the only way to find them was to keep moving. With a final glance at the crystal, he turned and made his way toward the exit of the chamber. The journey was far from over, and the truth he had uncovered was only the beginning of a far greater story, one that would shape the future in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The rider stepped out of the underground chamber, the cool air of the surface world hitting his face like a slap. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, wrapping the village in an impenetrable shroud. The sense of urgency that had built up inside him during his time in the depths of the well now felt more pressing. He could no longer ignore the feeling that something was coming, something dark and unavoidable. His hand still tingled from where it had touched the crystal, and the strange energy that flowed through him had not faded. His mind felt sharp, almost too sharp, as if the whispers he had heard were now ingrained in his thoughts. The village lay before him, still and quiet, but something was different. The air was thick with anticipation. The rider knew that the calm he had felt before had been nothing but an illusion. He had awakened something, and now the world would feel the consequences. As the rider made his way through the fog, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every step he took seemed to echo louder in the silence, and the whispers in his mind grew stronger, more insistent. "The time is near," they said. "You cannot hide from what is coming." The rider's heart raced as he quickened his pace, heading toward the center of the village. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to the town square, as if something important awaited him there. The whispers in his mind led him, pulling him closer to the heart of the village. The fog parted briefly, revealing the square just ahead. But when he reached it, he stopped in his tracks. The well from before was no longer where it had been. In its place was a dark, swirling vortex, its edges glowing with the same eerie light he had seen in the crystal. The air crackled with energy, and the rider knew that whatever was happening was beyond his control. The vortex seemed to breathe, its dark tendrils reaching out toward the rider as though calling to him. He could feel the pull, the magnetic force drawing him closer to the center of the swirling mass. "You must face it," the voice echoed in his mind. "The awakening is not complete." The rider hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to turn and run. But he couldn't. He had come too far, and there was no turning back now. With every step, the air grew heavier, the pressure mounting. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with an overwhelming sense of urgency. The vortex pulsed, its glow brightening as if feeding off the rider's presence. He reached the edge, and for a moment he stood there, staring into the depths of the swirling darkness. A strange sensation of calm washed over him. He understood, in that instant, that this was the moment he had been waiting for. The rider took a deep breath and stepped forward. As soon as his foot crossed the threshold of the vortex, the world around him shifted. The ground beneath him disappeared, and he was falling, plummeting into a vast empty space. His heart raced as he reached out in vain, trying to grab onto something, anything. The fall seemed endless, but just as panic began to set in, the rider landed with a heavy thud. He quickly rose to his feet, disoriented but unharmed. The landscape around him was unlike anything he had ever seen, an endless expanse of twisted barren trees and jagged rocks, all bathed in a sickly green light. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of decay. It was as if he had entered a world on the brink of collapse, where everything was dying, and nothing could be saved. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. The rider felt the weight of his actions settle upon him. This was the place where everything would change. As the rider moved deeper into the strange world, he could sense that he was not alone. There was something out there, something watching him, but it remained hidden from view. The sense of dread grew stronger with every step, the air becoming thicker, heavier. It was as if the very landscape itself was alive, watching his every move. The rider's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, but he knew that whatever awaited him here was beyond anything a blade could defeat. He had no choice but to continue forward. His mind raced with questions. What was this place? Why had he been brought here? The answers were just out of reach, but he could feel them just beneath the surface. He was on the edge of something much larger than he could comprehend. He had to keep going. He had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead. The rider's boots crunched against the dry, cracked earth as he ventured deeper into the desolate landscape. The eerie green glow continued to hang over everything, casting a sickly pallor on the twisted trees and jagged rocks. Every step he took felt heavier, as though the very land itself was fighting him, unwilling to allow his presence. His hand remained on the hilt of his sword, a small comfort in a world that seemed to reject him. He could feel something watching him from the shadows, though he couldn't quite pinpoint its location. The silence was unbearable, the kind of silence that presses in on your chest, making it difficult to breathe. Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of dread, the rider knew he had to keep moving. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. The answers he sought were somewhere ahead, hidden beneath this twisted world, and he was determined to uncover them. As he walked further into the heart of this strange world, the rider began to notice something peculiar. In the distance, faint shapes appeared, figures, cloaked and hooded, standing motionless among the twisted trees. Their faces were hidden, but the rider could feel their eyes upon him, the weight of their gaze pressing against his skin. He couldn't see their hands, but somehow, he knew they were holding something. Something that pulsed with the same eerie energy that filled the air. The figures didn't move as he drew closer, but their presence seemed to fill the space, making it feel more oppressive with each step. The rider's heart began to race. Were they waiting for him? Or were they part of something larger, something beyond his understanding? The more he thought about it, the more the sense of dread gnawed at him. He was walking into the unknown, and there was no telling what might happen next. The rider stopped just short of the cloaked figures, his heart pounding in his chest. A strange, suffocating silence fell over the area as he stared at the hooded figures. For a long moment there was no movement, no sound. Then, without warning, one of the figures stepped forward, its movements fluid and unsettlingly graceful. The rider instinctively gripped his sword tighter, but the figure made no move toward him. Instead, it spoke. "You have come just as we knew you would." The voice was soft, but filled with an unsettling certainty. "The awakening has begun, and you are the catalyst." The rider's mind raced. How did they know about him? Who were these figures? You seek answers, But the path ahead is fraught with peril, the figure continued. You must decide if you are ready to bear the burden of the truth. The rider's pulse quickened. He had no choice but to continue. Tell me what I must do, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The figure raised a hand, and a soft glowing light appeared in the palm of their outstretched hand. This is the key, the figure said, their voice calm yet heavy with meaning. The key to your past, your purpose, and the fate of this world. You must choose whether to take it or leave it behind. The rider's eyes followed the light, a strange warmth emanating from it. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its glow filled the air with a gentle beckoning force. The rider hesitated for only a moment before reaching out, his fingers brushing the surface of the light. The moment his skin made contact, the world around him shifted again. The ground beneath him trembled as the light in his hand grew brighter, and the figures around him began to whisper in unison, their voices a low, resonant hum. He felt a deep connection to the light, as though it was a part of him. The whispers faded, replaced by a sudden clarity. He knew what he had to do. The rider closed his fingers around the light, and in an instant, the world around him was gone. He found himself standing in a vast open space, the sky above filled with swirling clouds of energy. The air was charged with an unnatural force, and the rider felt as though he were being pulled in multiple directions at once. He opened his eyes to find that the landscape had transformed. There were no trees, no rocks, just an endless void stretching out before him. The only thing that remained was the light in his hand, which now seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as his own heartbeat. A low rumbling sound echoed through the void, and the rider's heart skipped a beat. The world around him was shifting, changing, and he knew he was at the heart of whatever forces had brought him here. You have made your choice, a voice boomed, its power overwhelming. Now you must face the consequences. The void around the rider seemed to stretch on forever, its swirling energy pulsing like a living thing. His senses were overwhelmed, yet there was an undeniable clarity in his mind. The voice that had spoken to him before now echoed through the vastness, a booming force that reverberated through every fiber of his being. You have stepped beyond the threshold, the voice intoned. The world you know is no more. What lies ahead is not for the faint of heart. The rider stood motionless, his heart steady, his mind focused. He had chosen to embrace the power, and now he was paying the price. The light in his hand flickered, its pulse matching the rhythm of his breath. The ground beneath him began to shift, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. He took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but at least he knew now that the truth lay ahead, buried in the heart of this unknown world. The ground beneath the rider continued to shift, and the air around him thickened with energy. He could feel the pull of the unknown growing stronger, urging him to move forward. A faint glow appeared in the distance, a flickering light that seemed to pulse with life. The rider hesitated for only a moment before beginning his journey toward it. Each step he took felt like a battle against the force pulling him in every direction. As he walked, the whispers returned, filling his mind with fragmented thoughts. It is not the destination, but the journey, they murmured. The trials ahead will test your will. Only by facing them will you unlock the true power within. The rider pressed on, the light growing closer with each step. He had no choice but to follow the path laid out before him. The whispers grew louder, but they were no longer a threat. They were guiding him, preparing him for what awaited in the heart of this strange world. As the rider neared the light, it became clearer, taking shape in the distance. What he had once thought to be an ethereal glow was now revealed to be a towering structure, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly energy. The structure was unlike anything he had ever seen, vast, dark, and yet pulsing with life. It seemed to breathe in the same rhythm as the light in his hand, as if it were alive, waiting for him. He stepped closer, feeling the ground beneath him solidify with each step. The structure's towering form loomed overhead, casting a long shadow over the rider. The whispers in his mind had faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that filled the air. The rider's breath quickened as he approached the massive doors, their surface etched with ancient symbols. He had come this far, but what lay beyond the doors was a mystery. The truth he had sought for so long was now within his grasp, but he had to face what lay inside first. The rider reached the massive doors of the structure, his hand resting on the cold surface. For a moment, nothing happened. The air around him was still, and the only sound was the steady beat of his heart. Then, with a groan that seemed to reverberate through the entire structure, the doors began to open. Slowly, inch by inch, they creaked open, revealing an endless hallway of darkness beyond. The light in the rider's hand flickered once more, its glow growing brighter as the doors opened wider. He stepped forward, each movement slow, deliberate. The energy around him seemed to shift, and the whispers returned, now filled with urgency. "You have come far, but now the true trial begins," they warned. The rider's breath hitched as he took the first step into the darkness. The door behind him slammed shut, plunging him into complete darkness. He was no longer just walking through the unknown, he was entering it. The moment the door shut behind him, the rider felt the air shift. The darkness was absolute, yet the light in his hand illuminated just enough of the path ahead. The walls of the hallway seemed to close in, narrowing with every step he took. The whispers in his mind were deafening now, a cacophony of voices urging him forward. "This is the test," they said. "The final trial." The rider pressed on, his footsteps echoing through the hallway. He could feel the energy around him, vibrating with an intensity that matched the pounding of his heart. The path ahead twisted, winding through the endless darkness. With each step, the air grew colder, and the whispers turned into words, clear and distinct. "You must choose, the truth or the power." The rider's breath came in shallow gasps as the hallway narrowed to a point, the walls pressing in on him. The light in his hand flared one last time, and the rider knew that whatever decision he made next would shape his destiny forever.